That night when I walked out on my wife, I never planned to return. Our baby, lost to us forever, had turned our marriage into a desolate battleground of blame and silence. I vanished without a trace, seeking oblivion in a new life, far from the shattered remnants of our past. Yet destiny, that cruel weaver of fates, had other designs. A devastating accident dragged me back to Chicago, broken and vulnerable. What I could never have anticipated was that she had been searching for me, and the woman I believed I would never see again was about to knock upon my door. By the way, please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. My name is Mason Cooper, 38 years old. Until last year, I was a senior web designer at Horizon Digital in Chicago. I commanded it all: a beautiful wife named Grace, a downtown condo with an unparalleled view of Lake Michigan, and a career meticulously built over 15 years. I was the architect of success, the one who arrived early, stayed late, and consistently delivered projects that ensured client loyalty. But suddenly, none of it mattered. Artificial intelligence swept in, executing my work faster, cheaper, and at times with a chilling perfection that eclipsed my own. Grace and I first crossed paths 7 years ago at a charity gala. She was a visionary interior designer, her vibrant presence commanding my attention from across the room as she eloquently articulated her concepts to an enthralled audience. Her image from that night remains etched in my memory. Dark hair cascading in waves around her shoulders, a deep blue dress mirroring the depths of her eyes, and a smile that stole my very breath. "You're staring," my friend Jacob had quipped, nudging my ribs. "I'm appreciating art," I'd responded, my gaze unwavering. When I finally summoned the courage to approach her, an immediate, undeniable connection sparked between us. 3 years later, amidst the rolling vineyards outside the city, we exchanged vows, surrounded by friends and family who, like us, believed we were destined for one another. The initial years of our marriage were everything I had ever dreamed. We were a true partnership, unwavering in our support of each other's aspirations, meticulously crafting plans for a shared future, and forging a home that was a true reflection of our intertwined souls. When Grace, just after our 4th anniversary, revealed she was pregnant, I felt an elation beyond words, believing myself the luckiest man alive. Then came the call, a thunderbolt striking me mid-client meeting. Grace had collapsed at home. By the time I reached the hospital, the world had tilted on its axis. She had lost the baby and, in the agonizing complications, very nearly her own life. For 3 harrowing days, I sat by her hospital bed, watching her drift in and out of consciousness, uttering desperate prayers to a God whose existence I now doubted. "Mr. Cooper," the doctor had said, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, "your wife is stable now, but the trauma was immense. She will require time and unwavering support to heal, both physically and emotionally." I nodded, a silent vow forming within me to be the unshakable pillar Grace needed. Little did I comprehend then that the very foundations of our marriage had already begun to fracture, and the most brutal storm of our lives was just beginning to gather on the horizon. Grace returned home from the hospital a ghost of her former self. The vibrant, passionate designer I had cherished had been replaced by a quiet, withdrawn stranger who drifted through our condo, touching objects as if to confirm their reality. I clung to the desperate hope that this was merely a temporary eclipse, a fleeting stage of grief with its own timeline. Patience, I told myself, was paramount. "Do you want some breakfast?" I offered one morning, roughly 2 weeks after her discharge. I had risen early to prepare her favorite blueberry pancakes. Grace stared at the plate I placed before her. "I'm not hungry," she said flatly, pushing it away. "You need to eat something," I insisted, striving to keep my voice gentle. "The doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said." Her sudden shout startled us both. "I'm sorry," she added immediately, rubbing her temples. I can't do this right now." This painful pattern became our new reality. I would reach out and Grace would recoil. I would attempt to speak of what had happened and she would deftly change the subject or simply leave the room. When I cautiously suggested grief counseling, she recoiled, her gaze accusing as if I had proposed something shameful. "I don't need a stranger telling me how to feel," she stated coldly. Nights were a torment. Grace would curl up on the extreme edge of our bed, her back to me. Sometimes I would awaken to the muffled sound of her weeping in the bathroom, the shower running to mask her sorrow. When I would knock on the door, she would claim she was fine, merely needing space. I plunged myself into my work, remaining at the office later and later, convincing myself I was providing her the solitude she craved. In truth, I was fleeing the escalating tension that permeated our home. But even my career, the one bastion of stability I believed I could rely on, began to show ominous cracks. "We need to discuss the Westfield project," my boss Derek announced one afternoon, closing my office door with a definitive click. "What about it?" I asked, looking up from my monitor. "Their deadline isn't for another 3 weeks." Derek shifted uneasily. "They weren't thrilled with the initial designs. They're thinking of going with something more automated." My stomach clenched. "Automated? You mean they want to use an AI design platform?" "They've been testing it and like the results. It's nothing personal, Mason, it's just business." But it felt intensely personal. It felt as though every solid anchor in my life was dissolving into sand beneath my feet. One evening, I returned home earlier than usual, carrying takeout from Grace's favorite Thai restaurant, a desperate olive branch. I discovered her on our balcony, staring out at the Chicago skyline, a glass of wine in her hand. "I thought we could have dinner together," I offered, holding up the bag. Grace turned, and for a fleeting moment I saw a flicker of something akin to hope in her eyes before it was extinguished. "I already ate," she said. "Of course you did," I muttered, setting the bag down with an unnecessary thud. "What's that supposed to mean?" Grace's voice held an edge I was growing terrifyingly accustomed to. "Nothing. It doesn't mean anything." I was too weary for another futile argument. "No, say what you're thinking," she challenged, standing. "At least one of us should be honest." I refused to take the bait. Instead, I turned and walked away, consumed by the gnawing question of how much longer we could endure this slow, agonizing deterioration before one of us, or both, shattered completely. As weeks bled into months, a chilling suspicion began to gnaw at me. Was Grace seeing someone else? The thought tormented me through sleepless nights. She began returning home later, her explanations vague, client meetings and project deadlines becoming her impenetrable mantras. I desperately wanted to believe her, but doubt, that insidious poison, had begun to infect my very soul. One evening, while Grace was in the shower, I did something I swore I never would. I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I entered her passcode, feeling like a thief in my own home. I scrolled through messages, emails, and call history, a frantic search for evidence of betrayal. I found nothing. No suspicious texts, no frequently called unknown numbers, no incriminating emails. A part of me felt a profound relief, yet another part was plunged into an even deeper confusion. If there was no one else, then why was she pulling away so completely? Meanwhile, at work, the ground beneath me was crumbling. More and more clients were abandoning human designers for the siren song of AI design solutions. The Westfield project had been merely the first tremor. "We need to talk, Mason," Derek said during our monthly review, his expression grim. "The company is restructuring the design department. We're reducing the team by 30%. I squared my shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "And I'm part of that 30%. It was a statement, not a question, and Derek nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I fought for you, but the numbers don't lie. AI-generated designs are cutting our costs by 60% while delivering comparable results." "Comparable isn't the same as better," I countered, my voice steady despite the rising tide of panic in my chest. "Those algorithms can't understand human emotion, can't connect with clients on a personal level. I know that, you know that. But the board sees the bottom line, Mason. You'll get a generous severance package. I've also put together some recommendations if you want to freelance." I walked out of the building that afternoon, a cardboard box containing 7 years of my professional life clutched in my hands, utterly bereft of any notion of what came next. I drove through Chicago for hours, avoiding the stark reality of our empty condo, avoiding the crushing task of telling Grace I had failed at the one thing I believed I was truly skilled at. When I finally returned home, I found Grace seated at our dining table, surrounded by design samples. "I need to tell you something," I said, setting down my box of belongings. She looked up, her eyes widening as they landed on the box. "What happened?" "I lost my job. The AI revolution finally came for me." I attempted a laugh, but it emerged hollow and brittle. For a brief moment, something akin to compassion flickered across Grace's face. Then she looked away. "What are you going to do?" Not we. The stark distinction was not lost on me. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'll figure it out. I always do." I braced myself for criticism, perhaps even blame. Instead, Grace merely nodded and returned to her samples, as if my career implosion were just another Tuesday. That night I lay awake, wondering how we had become such profound strangers. When had we ceased to be partners, ceased to face life's challenges as one? A decision formed within me then. I would fight. I would fight for my career, fight for my marriage, fight for the life we had so carefully planned together. I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. But morning brought another argument, another icy shoulder, and I found myself questioning if I was fighting for something that had already ceased to exist. A month after losing my job, I was still floundering. The severance package offered a temporary reprieve from immediate bills, but freelance design work was proving far more elusive than Derek had suggested. Companies clamored for AI-assisted designers, those fluent in the new platforms, not traditionalists like me. I began to teach myself the new AI design tools, spending hours at the library since we had canceled our home internet to cut costs. Grace offered no complaints about the budget cuts. She was consumed by a major project for some tech billionaire's vacation home. But the weight of her silence was crushing. Every night she came home later. Every morning she departed earlier. "We should talk about what happens when the severance runs out," I ventured one rare evening when we were both home for dinner. Grace pushed food around her plate. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we might need to consider downsizing. This condo—" "I'm not selling our home," she interrupted sharply. "My career is going well. We can manage." "It's not just about money," I tried to explain. "It's about us, about where we're headed. We hardly see each other anymore. Hardly talk after everything that happened." "Don't," Grace warned, her knuckles white around her fork. "Don't bring that up." "We need to talk about it sometime, Grace. We lost a child." The harsh clatter of her fork against the plate silenced me. "I lost a child," she corrected, her voice chilling. "I was the one who felt him growing inside me. I was the one who woke up in a pool of blood. You got a phone call." Her words struck me like physical blows. I stood needing distance before I uttered something irreparable. "That's not fair, and you know it. I'm trying to help us heal, but you won't even let me in." "Maybe I don't want your help," she shot back. "Maybe I'm tired of you trying to fix everything, as if this is just another project with a deadline." "Then what do you want from me?" I demanded, my frustration finally boiling over. "Because I've tried everything I know how to do. I've given you space, I've tried talking, I've backed off. Nothing works. Nothing reaches you." Grace stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. "I need some air," she muttered, heading for the door. "It's after 9, I pointed out, following her. "Out!" was all she said before slamming the door behind her. I stood alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the debris of yet another failed attempt at connection. Something inside me snapped. If Grace wouldn't talk to me, perhaps she would talk to a professional. I called and made an appointment with a marriage counselor, leaving a message on Grace's phone with the details. That night, as I lay in our desolate bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Can't make appointment. Working." 3 words that seemed to encapsulate the dying embers of our marriage. I stared at the ceiling, weighing options I never imagined I'd have to consider. How much longer could we endure this? How much more could I bear before walking away ceased to feel like giving up, and began to feel like the only path to survival? The breaking point arrived unexpectedly. I had spent the day at a career fair, listening to tech companies describe their ideal candidates. Younger, more adaptable, fluent in AI platforms I was still struggling to master. By the time I returned home, my confidence had plummeted to rock bottom. All I craved was a quiet evening and perhaps a cold beer. Instead, I found Grace packing a suitcase. "What's going on?" I asked, though a chilling premonition already gripped me. "I'm staying at Diane's for a few days," she replied, not looking up. Diane was her closest friend, someone who had never particularly favored me. "What?" I demanded, a surge of raw frustration overriding my usual caution. Grace finally stopped packing and faced me. "Because I can't do this anymore, Mason. I can't live like we're just roommates circling each other waiting for something to change." "So your solution is to leave? That's going to fix things?" My voice rose despite my desperate attempts to maintain composure. "Nothing is fixing things!" Grace shouted, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "Not time, not space, not your constant hovering and trying to talk about feelings I don't want to discuss." I stepped closer. "You haven't even tried, Grace. You won't go to counseling. You won't talk to me. You won't let me in." "Because you can't understand." Tears welled in her eyes. "You can't possibly understand what it feels like to lose a child that was growing inside you." "I lost him too," I said, my voice cracking. "He was my son too." "It's not the same," Grace whispered, but some of the fire had gone out of her voice. "No, it's not the same," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean my grief isn't real. That doesn't mean I haven't been hurting too." We stood facing each other. The truth we had desperately avoided for months finally laid bare between us. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I need to go," she said finally, zipping her suitcase closed. "I need to figure out if this marriage is something I can still save." "If you can save," I echoed. "This isn't just on you, Grace. It takes both of us." "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one drowning?" she asked. I watched her gather her things, feeling an odd, unsettling calm. Something had irrevocably shifted inside me. As she headed for the door, I made a decision that surprised even myself. "I'll be gone when you get back," I said quietly. Grace froze, turning slowly to face me. "What?" "You need space. I'll give it to you. All of it." I met her gaze steadily. "Take your time. When you come back, I won't be here." "Mason, that's not what I—" "It's what we both need," I interrupted. "A clean break. No more circling each other. No more half measures." She stared at me, searching my face for hesitation, perhaps, or a sign that I didn't truly mean it. But my mind was resolute. Whatever came next, it could not be worse than this slow, agonizing disintegration of everything we had painstakingly built together. After Grace departed, I sat alone in our silent condo, meticulously charting my escape from a life that no longer felt like my own. I left without a farewell, no note, no further explanation beyond our final, crushing conversation. Perhaps that marks me as a coward, but words seemed utterly futile after months of orbiting each other in suffocating circles. I packed only essentials while Grace was at Diane's. Clothes, my laptop, vital documents, and the meager cash remaining after the layoff. I withdrew the last of the money from our joint account, barely enough for a few weeks if I exercised extreme caution, and left my keys on the kitchen counter. Walking out of the building with my life condensed into a duffel bag and a backpack felt surreal, as if I were observing someone else make this monumental decision. But with each step, a strange, exhilarating lightness grew within my chest. For the first time in months, I was taking decisive action instead of simply reacting to an ever-worsening fate. I drove north with no fixed destination, only a vague yearning for somewhere quiet to regroup. Lake Michigan became my guide, its endless shoreline a beckoning path until the city lights receded behind me and the open road stretched ahead. Near a small town called Harbor Springs, I spotted a cabin for rent sign on a rural mailbox. The place was little more than a humble shed on the edge of the woods, but it boasted electricity, running water, and most crucially, no lingering echoes of Grace. The elderly owner, Ed, seemed unperturbed by my lack of employment or references. "Rent's due first of the month, cash only." Keep the place standing and we'll get along fine, he said, handing me a rusty key. That first night, utterly alone in the cabin, I sat on the porch, watching stars ignite across the vast canvas of the lake. The silence was absolute. No traffic's roar, no distant murmur of neighbors, no tension-filled space between two souls who could no longer find their way back to each other. I breathed deeply, inhaling the crisp, pine-scented air, and felt something constricted within me begin to unclench. The following morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I needed income, and swiftly. Opening my laptop, I meticulously set up profiles on every freelance design platform I could unearth. My pitch was simple: an experienced designer diligently retraining in AI-assisted tools, offering services at competitive rates while building a new portfolio in cutting-edge technologies. To my astonishment, work began to trickle in almost immediately. Small businesses, unable to afford fully automated solutions but desperate for design assistance, reached out. I toiled for 16 hours a day, immersing myself in new programs and diligently completing projects, collapsing into bed utterly exhausted, yet buoyed by a profound sense of accomplishment that had been absent for far too long. I did not contact Grace. I did not check social media to see if she was searching for me. I simply vanished, shedding my old life like a snake casting off outgrown skin. Some nights, lying on the cabin's lumpy mattress, I wondered if she worried, if she missed me, if she seethed with anger at my abrupt departure. Other nights, I slept dreamlessly, unburdened by the crushing weight of our shared grief and the escalating resentment that had consumed us. 3 weeks into my self-imposed exile, a startling realization struck me. I hadn't thought about Chicago or my old job or even Grace for an entire day. The revelation should have troubled me. Instead, it felt like the first genuine healing in a year of festering wounds. 2 months into my new existence, I barely recognized the man I had become. My beard had grown thick, my city pallor replaced by a healthy tan from working outdoors. Ed, my landlord, had begun hiring me for various odd jobs around his sprawling property, fixing the sagging porch on his house, repainting outbuildings, clearing brush. The physical labor proved profoundly therapeutic, a welcome counterpoint to the digital design work that sustained me. I had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching mist rise from the lake. Days were meticulously split between freelance projects and manual labor. Evenings were reserved for reading or sketching or simply sitting beneath a vast canopy of stars, contemplating everything and nothing. I purchased a used kayak from a local shop and began exploring the shoreline, discovering hidden coves and deserted beaches. The sheer vastness of Lake Michigan became a potent metaphor for my life, territory both intimidating and brimming with endless possibility. My phone remained off most days. I had established a new email account solely for clients and checked my old one only occasionally. No messages from Grace. Whether she was granting me space or had simply moved on, the outcome was the same: a profound silence. Then came the accident. I was assisting Ed in replacing rotted support beams beneath his deck when the temporary bracing gave way. 2,000 pounds of unforgiving pressure trapped my left leg, crushing it against the foundation. Ed's swift thinking saved me from a far worse fate. He used his truck jack to lift the deck just enough for me to wrench myself free. The rural clinic, however, was woefully unequipped for such complex injuries. "You need surgery," the doctor explained, his gaze fixed on my x-rays. "The tibia is shattered in 3 places. We can stabilize you here, but you require specialists." "How much will that cost?" I asked, knowing my catastrophic coverage had tragically lapsed with my employment. The doctor's grim expression conveyed everything. "Your best option is Chicago Northwestern. They have an excellent orthopedic team." Chicago, the very place I had fought so desperately to escape. But lying there, drugged and desperate, I could conjure no alternatives. Ed drove me to the train station the following morning, my leg immobilized in a temporary cast. "You sure there's someone to meet you?" he asked, his concern palpable. I nodded, the lie easier than the truth. I had precisely one person to call in Chicago, my former boss, Derek. To his immense credit, Derek asked no questions when I called from the train. "I'll pick you up. You can stay with us until you're sorted." As the landscape outside transformed from rural Michigan to Indiana suburbs to Chicago's familiar towering skyline, I wrestled with a maelstrom of contradictory emotions. I had abandoned the city, vowing never to return. Now I was being dragged back, broken in more ways than one, facing surgeries I couldn't afford and a recovery that would utterly derail the fragile independence I had painstakingly forged. The train pulled into Union Station as evening descended. I hobbled toward the main exit on crutches, feeling like a defeated soldier returning from a failed campaign. Derek and his wife Sarah welcomed me into their suburban home with unwavering kindness and no judgment. The guest room became my personal recovery space after surgery, a procedure that inserted a titanium rod and 6 screws into my shattered leg. The orthopedic surgeon promised I would walk normally again, but warned the process would span many arduous months. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Sarah assured me over dinner 1 week after my operation. "We have plenty of room." "I appreciate it, but I can't impose indefinitely," I replied, uncomfortable with the sheer magnitude of their generosity. "Once I'm mobile enough for crutches, I'll find my own place." Derek exchanged a glance with his wife. "About that, Mason, there's something you should know." My stomach clenched. "Is it Grace? Did something happen?" "She's been looking for you," Derek said carefully. "She came to the office about a month after you left, asking if anyone had heard from you." I stared at him, processing this astonishing information. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I hadn't heard from you. That was before your accident." He hesitated. "She seemed worried, Mason, not angry, just concerned." That night, alone in the guest room, I wrestled with this new, unsettling knowledge. Grace had looked for me. Did that mean she cared, or was she merely tying up loose ends? The question haunted me through a restless night. During physical therapy the next day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Derek told me, "You're back, we need to talk." My heart hammered against my ribs. Should I respond? What would I even say? Sorry I disappeared? I wasn't sorry. Leaving had been a desperate act of self-preservation. After 3 days of intense internal debate, I finally texted back, "I'm staying with Derek and Sarah while recovering from surgery. Broke my leg in Michigan." Grace's response came immediately, "Can I visit you?" Those 4 words carried the immense weight of our entire history. I stared at them until the screen dimmed, then with a trembling finger typed, "Yes." The next afternoon, I heard her car pull into Derek's driveway. I was alone in the house, Derek and Sarah having tactfully found urgent errands. I positioned myself in the living room, leg propped on pillows, striving to appear casual despite my thundering pulse. The doorbell rang. Drawing a deep breath, I called out, "It's open." Grace stepped inside, hesitating at the threshold. She looked thinner than I remembered, her dark hair shorter, framing a face that bore the undeniable marks of strain. "Mason," she said softly. Just my name, nothing more. "Hello, Grace," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She moved into the room, her eyes fixed on my elevated leg with its surgical dressing and metal brackets. "What happened?" "Construction accident. I was working on a deck that collapsed." Grace sank into the armchair across from me. "A deck? You're a designer." "I was a designer," I corrected. "I've been doing whatever pays the bills." She looked around the room, her gaze everywhere but directly at me. "I thought you were dead," she said finally. When weeks passed with no word, I thought, I didn't know what to think. "I wasn't planning to die," I said, attempting a humor that fell flat. I needed space to figure things out. "So you just vanished," Grace's voice rose. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? I came home from Diane's expecting an argument, not an empty apartment." "Would you have let me go if I'd asked?" I challenged. She looked away. "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point. We were destroying each other, Grace. Every conversation became a battle. Every silence was loaded with blame. So running away was your solution? Her eyes flashed. Very mature, Mason. It wasn't about maturity. It was about survival. I shifted, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my leg. I was drowning in that apartment, in our marriage. I couldn't breathe anymore. Grace's expression softened slightly at my obvious discomfort. What happened to us? She asked, her voice softer now. We used to be so good together. We lost our son, I said simply, and instead of grieving together, we turned on each other. Grace looked down at her clasped hands. My therapist says I was punishing you because you weren't there when it happened. Your therapist? I hadn't expected that. She nodded. I started seeing her about a month after you left. I realized I couldn't handle it alone anymore. We sat in a heavy silence, the weight of her words settling between us. I grieve too, Grace, I said finally. Every day, but you shut me out. You made me feel like my pain didn't count because it wasn't physical. I know, she whispered. I was so lost in my own pain I couldn't see yours. Another silence, less tense than before. What happens now? Grace asked. I don't know, I admitted. I need to focus on healing, finding work again, building some kind of life, alone. The question contained layers of meaning. That depends, I said, meeting her eyes. Therapy helped you. Maybe it could help us if you're willing to try. Hope flickered across her face. You'd consider counseling after everything. I never stopped loving you, Grace. I just couldn't keep loving you the way things were. She reached across the space between us, tentatively taking my hand. I never stopped loving you either, even when I was furious that you'd left, even when I thought I might never see you again. Her touch was familiar yet new, like returning to a cherished place, irrevocably altered by the seasons. We were different people now, transformed by grief, separation, and the individual journeys we had undertaken. Whether those changes would draw us closer or confirm our fundamental incompatibility remained to be seen. One day at a time, I suggested. Grace nodded, squeezing my hand. One day at a time. As we sat together in that borrowed space, I felt something shift. Not a dramatic reconciliation, but a quiet opening. A possibility where before there had been only impenetrable walls. 1 year after my accident, I stood on my own 2 feet at the Chicago lakefront, watching the sunrise paint the water in hues of liquid gold. My left leg, though scarred and occasionally stiff, had healed well enough for me to walk without a limp. A minor miracle, according to my surgeon. More miraculous still was the treacherous path Grace and I had navigated. Weekly counseling sessions had evolved from painful excavations of the past to thoughtful, hopeful planning for our future. We had sold the downtown condo, too saturated with difficult memories, and rented a small house in Evanston, complete with a yard and a garden Grace was diligently coaxing back to vibrant life. Sorry I'm late, Grace called, jogging toward me with 2 coffee cups. Line at the cafe was insane. Worth the wait, I said, accepting the steaming cup and kissing her cheek. These small affections, once routine, then impossible, now felt precious, deliberate choices rather than ingrained habits. We walked along the shoreline, our shoulders occasionally brushing. Lake Michigan stretched before us, vast and humbling. I got the promotion, Grace said suddenly, creative director for the whole firm. That's fantastic. I turned to her, genuinely thrilled. Her career had flourished while mine had transformed. After months of freelancing, I had partnered with a developer to create accessible design tools for non-technical small business owners. The anti-AI approach, as we called it. It means more travel, she cautioned. At least initially. We'll make it work, I assured her. We're good at adapting now. Grace smiled, slipping her hand into mine. We've had practice. The path to reconciliation had been anything but smooth. We had faced setbacks, arguments where old destructive patterns threatened to re-emerge, moments when grief resurfaced unexpectedly, raw and agonizing. But we had learned to navigate those treacherous waters together, neither drowning nor allowing the other to sink. "I have something for you," Grace said, reaching into her pocket. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a black and white image, grainy, almost alien-looking yet utterly unmistakable, an ultrasound. I looked up, unable to form words. 10 weeks, Grace confirmed, her smile tremulous. "Everything looks healthy. The doctor says there's no reason to expect complications." I pulled her into a careful embrace, acutely mindful of the precious life she carried within her. "Are you ready for this?" I whispered against her hair. "Are we?" She nodded against my chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But not like before. This time we face it together." We stood holding each other as morning joggers passed and gulls wheeled overhead. The future stretched before us, unwritten, yet brimming with boundless possibility. Later, driving home, Grace asked, "Do you ever regret leaving that night?" I considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain it caused you," I said softly. "But I don't regret the journey. Without breaking apart completely, I don't think we could have rebuilt something stronger." Grace nodded, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. From endings come beginnings. In the quiet sanctuary of our car, those simple words encapsulated everything. The profound loss that had nearly destroyed us, the wrenching separation that had ultimately saved us, and the miraculous new life now, growing between us, a future neither of us had dared to imagine in our darkest days. Ladies and gentlemen, since you've listened to the end of this story, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which state you're watching from. Let's see what percentage of elite viewers make it to the end. And please, kindly turn your attention to the screen after this message. There you'll find a full playlist of thrilling stories, a subscribe button for the channel, and our most captivating story. Click, enjoy, and thank you.